You have an opinion today about how Judge Dixon passed away on that morning?
Yes, I did.
Is that opinion based on a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, it's based on a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
And what is your opinion?
My opinion is that was unequivocally accidental death.
And are you prepared to discuss the rationales for the foundation of that opinion?
Yes, I am.
Would it help you to use the exhibits I showed you in doing so?
It would be most helpful.
Permission for the witness to step down, granted. Then you can kind of like slowly walk on.
Are you going to say anything else? Okay.
Dr. Sharp, would you mind explaining to the jury what you're basing this opinion on?
I would be happy to. The manner of death, which is the term that we would use to distinguish between accidental, suicidal, and homicide versus natural, in this case is accidental. And the reasons are as such. First, the wound that I observed was an asymmetrical wound, and each of these I'll explain as I go through the other exhibits. And number two, this was not a contact wound, and I'll discuss the proximity of the weapon in terms of closeness or close range distance. And number three, the location of the wound, that is, it was through the eye, through the top part of the head. And number four, the blood spatter pattern, which will determine the height of the trajectory, and I will explain what a blood spatter pattern is later. And number five, the lines of convergence of the blood spatter pattern will determine the angle at which the shotgun pellets entered through his eye and exited, and where they hit on the wall, on the door. And number six, the overall scene to discuss the various positions, to include his final resting position, where the screwdriver was, where the butt of the shotgun is, and the chair as well. And those will be, as you will see as I discuss with each exhibit, the main reasons why this is unequivocally an accident. So I'd like to start with the first exhibit, if that's all right. Do I ask that, or
You just go.
I'd like to start with the first exhibit.
You can ask it as a rhetorical, like you would in the classroom.
The first exhibit I'd like to show is a photograph that I had taken as I entered Judge Dixon's study. And as you can see, his body is lying, head facing the door. There's the door swung open, chair lodged up against the staircase or bookcase, and my observations at that moment are immediately to the asymmetry of the wound itself, and that is, as you can see, it's often an angle, it's not a central type injury. And what I mean by that, and that's very important in terms of suicide, is by far the majority, if not almost all, suicidal deaths are close contact wounds under the chin, through the mouth, and through the forehead. And that what we call the x-axis of the human body. And I would like to show you then, as a follow-up to that, to confirm the x and y axis, and this is actually a diagram from my internal examination. It shows the perforating entrance here, right above the eye and right below what we would call the orbital rim, and exiting through the top of the head, or the parietal or the frontal area. So we immediately know that we have an upward and from front to back injury. The presence of an asymmetric, meaning not in line with the x-axis, is strongly favoring for an accidental. If that's all I had, I would still say that's strongly favoring just an accidental death.
Why is that?
Because the majority of suicides performed are done under the chin in the central, performed in through the mouth, up through the center, or through the forehead. And all are on the x-axis of the body. And those, all three, are surefire ways of committing suicide. The accidental angle here favors accident because in shooting above or around the eye, and also in the abdomen, people do not commit suicide by shooting themselves in the eye or the abdomen because very often they survive it. So it's well established in the medical literature that very rarely, if unusually, would someone commit suicide just through the eye. So that in and of itself already puts it in the probably 90 to 95% range that this is an accidental versus suicide. So that alone, as I observed that at that position, I realized that Judge Dixon had an accident with a shotgun. The second point, which further substantiates this angle, this asymmetric angle, and that is this is not a direct contact wound. And I will show you a closer up exhibit showing the irregularity of the entrance wound. A contact wound typically would have fouling around the barrel, around the end of the barrel that would be tattooed. It's called tattooing. That would actually be on the skin. And there's no contact here. So we have an irregular from a distance, fairly close because there's some fouling in here. It's fairly close, but it's not a contact wound.
Why are most suicides contact wounds?
Most suicides are contact wounds, especially with shotguns, is because in order for the victim to be able to even reach the trigger, they have to have it lodged up against their chin, in their mouth, or in their forehead like that, so they can even reach the trigger. And therefore, if there's any distance, and in this case probably 8 to 10 inches, that means it's 8 to 10 inches further from the length of his arm, and probably would never have been able to even reach the trigger anyway. So these two facts now probably put it in the 99% range that this was accidental. But there's no contact wound, and that it's an asymmetric wound. The third point is the location of the wound, which we've already briefly discussed, and I'll say again, and it's very important to understand that people do not commit suicide by shooting themselves in the eye. For whatever reason, they do not. There's no established evidence in the medical literature. And all this, in the research I've done, and in my 10 years of experience, I've never seen anyone shoot themselves in the eye to commit suicide, especially at this angle. So that would be the third thing. So we have the overall style being the angle would be asymmetric. We have no contact wound. We have location directly above the eye. It's not even into the eye. It's actually above the eye. And where we have, look at the rest of the face. The nose is intact. The mouth, the chin, the whole right side of the face is intact. And if you ever have an opportunity to see a shotgun wound by suicide, you would know that this does not look like that. Okay. The fourth thing that I noticed as I walked around and further enhances the accidental nature of this. And at first glance, you may not recognize it, but here is a blood spatter pattern. And this pattern, at that height, first told me I see the desk is about 30 inches. So probably the height of it was about 36 inches. I already knew then when I saw that that's a very unusual angle. And as I looked around, I don't know if we have any photos, I don't think we do. I did not see any spatter above 36 inches where the center of the spatter pattern would be, or anything on the ceiling. And if you're familiar at all with guns or trajectory of blood, you would know that if someone shot themselves under the chin, in the mouth, or in the forehead, as would be expected with a shotgun, you would see plenty of spatter on the ceiling and very high up on the walls. You may see some down here, but that would be because of gravity. But you see none at all. So I knew right then, that further confirmed that there was a very odd angle at which the trajectory for the entrance and exit went. So I went ahead and took a picture straight on to try to better evaluate.
You just cover that right up, just right on top of that.
To better evaluate the actual pattern itself. And there are ways that we can look at it. We can look at it in a general pattern and say, the height of this is at the doorknob. Now, how do I know that for a fact? Well, if you look very carefully, you'll see right in the center here a circular area that is virtually completely clean. And that is called the center of spatter. And the blood spatter being, by definition, the pattern of blood and tissue as it contacts a hard surface, and that would suggest the angle at which something came to it. And if you look very carefully here, you'll see larger pieces of tissue and blood forming a circle around this. And each one of those, as they head toward the center or clearing, would be called a line of convergence. And that point in the center of that would give us what we would consider the actual angle at which, from which we can determine where that bullet or pellets, shotgun pellets came from. So we can see the door handle there. I have this yardstick, which I'll use later to explain, but we have a door handle here to show that it's, as most door handles are 36 inches high. This was no more, the angle was no more coming from the ground than 36 inches. So that's the blood spatter pattern, and that's the line of convergence to emphasize the lowness of to emphasize the angle of the trajectory. That is, if it was a lot lower on the ground, he may have been on the ground and shot himself, or if it was way up high or on the ceiling, then he was shot upward, which is what you would expect. And we do have, in fact, this is a front to back shoot, and it emerged the exit wounds on the top of the head. So the only way to reach that is as if his head was somewhere between 36 inches and the ground. So we will try to explain that in a moment. The final overall point, and then I would like to go back and then re-emphasize some of these points. Okay, to do it that way. Yeah. Final overall, the overall scene. If you look at the body position, I guess I could use that. I'll just use this one.
These two are probably better.
Okay.
Just for real. We're not going to say this, but those ones have the chair and everything. I would just put them both up side by side, put them right on the top of the blood.
I have two angles of the final resting scene to emphasize an angle from around the right side of the door and then the angle from the west wall. And the idea here is want you to get an overall feel of what I saw when I walked through. And that is, we have a human being, we have Judge Dixon lying flat on his back with his hands in what we would call the anatomic position, and that is supine. Supine is the most relaxed and most fallen position. And if you've ever fallen backwards, you know the first thing that happens is your hand falls back. Okay? Secondly, we have a screwdriver right next to his right hand. So I speculate that the screwdriver was in his hand, and that as he fell, it fell out, fell directly beside him. Third, we have a shotgun, the butt of the shotgun all the way down by the angle. Now, in any evidence that I've reviewed concerning suicide, that when someone commits a suicide and they have a gun lodged or holding a gun, but very, very frequently, probably more than 50% of the time, the gun is still clutched in their hand, even after impact, and they've fallen backwards. So we have no clutched hand, no clutched gun. We have a butt that's all the way down there. There's no conceivable way that, given the angle, that his hand could have reached the trigger there.
Doctor, what about the other 50% of the time?
The other 50% of the time is that the gun would still be either lying flat on the body or adjacent, touching the body. And in this particular case, you can see that the gun is at least 1.5 feet away from his body. So it's been released before he is actually shot. That's in my mind, without a doubt. So what we have here, the overall scene is we have a 6-foot male who somehow or another accidentally fell backwards, and somehow or another, which I believe we can actually get that's one black.
It's okay. It's just
okay.
Screen.
Which I believe,
better for you.
I believe suggested, suggested that the gun slipped through his hand, and that the butt of the gun hit there, discharged, and as he was falling backwards, hit his face and went through right above his eye to the top of his head and created a spatter. And I'd like to demonstrate, if I could have your assistance, please.
Surely. You tell me what to do.
Okay, if you would, for now, just hold this for a second. And what I want to do is kind of take each part of the scene, and as best as I can, basically get a quick run through. I believe that before
we start, can you explain to the jury what this what this styrofoam head represents?
Yes, I will keep it hard. Okay. The styrofoam head, as you can see, is a representation of this diagram. And the attempt here is to show you what I believe to be the accurate trajectory of the shotgun pellets as they went through right above the eye and came out through the center of the head, top of the head. So that you can see that this angle is, regardless where I put his head, that's the angle that we know for a fact went through. So what we need to do is determine that angle in relation to the 36 inches. So what I'd like to do is, if you wouldn't mind, hold this high, right there. And I will take this, if you'll take the balloon pauses for a second, just to make sure we're actually capturing this.
We can do this in 2 different points.